Welcome to our LinkedIn segment with Tivrat Garg, a student I'm known for, no longer a student, an assistant professor now. And back then when I knew him, he was a student at Amity International and then went to a liberal arts college in the US. And then just his life has been so fascinating. So why don't you introduce yourself and we'll take it from there.
Hi, I'm Tivrat Garg. I'm an assistant professor of economics at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at the University of California, San Diego. I am an environmental economist who specializes in thinking about adaptation to climate change amongst poor and low-income communities in emerging economies.
So when you were in high school, you had perhaps no idea whether you'd be pursuing an interest in academia, or did you have that inkling?
No, I didn't.
All right. So how did that journey shape up? And the audience would be really interested to know how does one decide that academics and living a life of a professor, researcher can pan out?
Yeah, I honestly, when I went to college, I wanted to be an investment banker. But I took two important classes, one in health economics and one in development economics by professors at Lafayette College. And I think it just opened up my world to thinking about economics as more than just a mechanism to discuss, money and financial transactions, but really as a way of thinking and a toolkit that can address some of the most pressing problems that we face. And I think that intellectual opportunity was just very exciting. And I had good mentors who encouraged me to pursue graduate training. I was even quite unsure about whether that's something I wanted to do, but I think the more I spent time in graduate school, the more I realized this is really where I drive a lot of intellectual stimulation. And I thought, and increasingly I started liking research a lot more, and the entire process of it, from thinking about the initial idea to how do you go about testing that idea out in the real world, collecting data, etc. And so, after my graduate training, I was offered a position here at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at the University of California, San Diego. And I said, this is a great place to study both the economics of emerging countries and at the same time, we're one of the leading climate science groups in the world at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. And I figured, there's a place where I can deliver potentially down the line policy influence on climate change, which I think is the number one issue that we face today, because it intersects with all aspects of health, human productivity, inequality, poverty. And so that was what led me to take on the position, and I really enjoyed it.
So what I'm hearing is there are two parts of that decision. One was immersing yourself in something, surrounding yourself with people who are doing work that might interest you, and then sort of finding a niche within that space, initially with research. But it also comes with the other aspect, right? The teaching, and initially assisting maybe, and then gradually taking on role as a professor. So what's your day like? Do you balance research interests with your teaching job? And what does a student who might be wishing to become an academician want to know about a routine of an assistant professor?
Yeah, I think it's certainly teaching is a very exciting part. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have some excellent professors, both in my undergraduate and graduate training. And so the experience that I had of sort of having my world opened up in terms of the possibilities with the toolkit that I was learning, like just the scope of problems you can solve with an economics training. I think I like translating that and delivering that to sort of my students in turn, and seeing that experience is very rewarding. A typical day is, if you're teaching that day, you prep for your lecture, you go in, deliver the lecture. Students have a bunch of questions afterwards. Some days you have office hours where you get to have sort of more personalized interactions with students. And then, you're doing a couple of different research projects. You deal with the email traffic that comes in and out. Occasionally you have committee meetings, whether that's for PhD students or whether that's for university service. And so, it's not a standard 9 to 5 days. Some days are longer, some days are shorter, but you get the flexibility of picking which hours you're working. I think the joke in academia is that you work 24 hours a day, but you get to pick which 24 hours. So that's the way I describe it. But I think it's one of the few occupations where your output and your production output sort of moves with you from job to job. The papers that I write are tied to me for the rest of my life. It's not job specific capital that you build. The courses that I develop are my courses that I have developed for, and no matter where I go, I can translate that material. So a lot of it is just investment in your own potential, which I think is what distinguishes it from a lot of other jobs where, yes, you learn experience, but a lot of the output that you're developing is job specific and company specific.
Fascinating. What you mentioned is that build capital, like each individual who commits to something, be it a job in industry or in academia, is walking that path, making those connections, having a body of work which sort of showcases their talent, interests, goals. So moving on, I think we've had this conversation with other students I've known in the past, and they've been also interested in various aspects of sustainability, environment, climate change. Some look at it from even the data science route. So it's very interdisciplinary, the subject that you've chosen, environmental and development economics. How would you define a niche or the legacy that you want to create in this, if I would say that?
I think the newer approach, and I say new, not to say this is yesterday, but the last 10, 15 years, the approach to economics research has really shifted from sort of like a narrowed understanding of what economics is to more of, this is the policy problem that we're interested in. And then it's about finding the right knowledge and the right toolkits to cover all aspects of it. So if you want to understand the impacts of climate change, you need to understand partly the climate science behind it. Like, how is future changes in greenhouse gas emissions going to translate into things like rising temperatures, hurricanes, etc. Once you understand that, then you have to understand the dynamics of rural areas of agriculture, etc. And that's all knowledge that you are now expected to know, because the problem that you're solving is not sort of a narrow confines of one discipline. And I think that is where being at a university that has a lot of people doing a lot of really interesting and exciting work is really fun, because you get to walk across the department and you say, hey, this is a problem that I'm working on. I know this particular piece of it, but you're working on this. Let's work together, and then we can come closer to solving this problem. And I think that's I wake up every morning excited to go to work, because I know that I'm going to learn new things, and I'm going to get to have creative conversations where there's not a lot of boring days, at least in my line of research. And I think that's probably like the most one can ask for, is that there's not a lot of boring days. It's always something new and exciting to learn.
So of course, there's this whole interface with industry and research at universities. And I think that probably is also an exciting area of exploration. At UCSD or within your department, do you see that happening a lot? And what's the process for building those bridges?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a free market. You either have a toolkit or a problem statement or a data set, and you identify it. I think that's the interesting thing, is that nobody's handing me a list of problems to solve. I have to go out and I have to figure out what the big questions is. Like, the hardest thing about a PhD and research really is learning how to ask the right question. It's not answering the question, it's learning how to ask the right question. And there's that famous line from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where the computer says, I've looked and I've looked and I've looked, and yes, the answer is 42. But I think the problem is you've never known what the question is. And I think that's really the hardest part about research, is learning how to ask the right question.
That's probably the best way to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Devrath, and been catching up and knowing a lot more that's gone on in your life in these last 16 years.
Yeah.
Great.
Pleasure to catch up as always.